Here on this channel, I try to take a look at all the crazy, strange, and straight up bizarre things that make comic books, well, comic books. So when I found out that freaking Marvel Comics of all people made an official book about the life of Pope John Paul II, I had to know more. The comic industry is no stranger to having a bunch of interesting takes on Christianity, such as the manga Messiah and Battle Pope, which was written by the creator of The Walking Dead. Seriously. But interesting fact, the Pope comic is not the only Catholic comic that Marvel's produced. And also, the content of the book itself really isn't anything to write home about. However, the actual history behind the scenes is super fascinating, and it starts in Japan, of all places. But before we get too far into things, I want to give a big thank you to our sponsor for today's video, Squarespace. Now, you've probably heard about it a million times already, but Squarespace is the all-in-one platform that makes building your own website a cinch. Even someone like me, who has zero web design experience, was able to build a site for my new business, Characters on Call, by taking an already great looking template and really making it my own. With a payment system built right into the website and with nothing to patch, install, or upgrade, I get to spend less time working on my website and more time working on my videos. I've personally been using Squarespace since before they were even a sponsor, so I can definitely recommend them. So go ahead and take a look at them for yourself. And when you're ready to launch, make sure you go to squarespace.com/Drake for 10% off your first purchase. But anyway, back to the video. So Marvel had a representative in Japan named Gene Pelk, who frequently visited the Franciscan Chapel Center in Tokyo, and it's there that he met a priest named Father Campion Lally. One day, when talking about their careers, Father Campion made the offhand remark, "Why don't you do a comic about St. Francis?" This was super out of left field, but especially since it could be used to celebrate the 800th anniversary of St. Francis's birth, Pelk thought, well, why not? To help get the ball rolling, Father Campion put Pelk in contact with Father Roy Gasnick, the director of the Franciscan Communications Office of New York, who had helped work on several St. Francis media projects in the past. As a plus, this dude was seriously into comics, with his personal favorite being Captain Marvel over at DC Comics. In an interview, Father Roy said that he always loved how when Billy Batson said the magic word Shazam, he transformed into a superhero. And it kind of reminded him of how communion transformed bread and wine into the blood and body of Jesus during Mass. Father Roy became an instrumental part in getting Marvel's Catholic projects off the ground, and he even picked up the nickname Comic Book Priest by the media. You see, this was in the 80s when people were actually buying comic books and the media reported on them. Crazy, right? With Father Roy's help, Marvel and the Franciscan Communications Office joint published Francis, Brother of the Universe in 1980 to pretty wide acclaim. It aimed to tell the real story of St. Francis's life, detached from anything related to the Marvel Comics universe and without any of the over-the-top flourishes that you'd expect from a superhero comics publisher. Personally, I'm only interested in this book because of the unique story behind it, since as a non-Catholic, I'm not really seeking out a biography of St. Francis. But if this was something that you'd be interested in, then yeah, this would be a pretty fun way to consume it. Due to the religious nature of this comic, Brother of the Universe was going to need a distribution method outside of the usual comic shops and newsstands, which led to a unique partnership between Marvel Comics and a Catholic publishing group called Paulist Press. While yes, this book was still going to be released at traditional comic shops, it didn't sell all that well there, which is to be expected. But because of Paulist Press, they were able to make insane sales to different sorts of clients, especially churches. Another benefit is that because of Paulist Press helping out with the book, they were able to avoid the 1-month sales limitation of Marvel and keep it printing. Oh, and they didn't just sell it for slightly longer than 1 month. It was actively being published from 1980 to 2007. So yeah, it sold for a lot longer, but how did this impact the total units sold? Well, if I'm going to be honest, comic sales data pre-90s is infamous for how poorly recorded it was. After chasing down a lot of leads, I found this article in Time magazine in 1986, which reported that the Francis book had sold around 750,000 units, and when interviewed by Back Issue magazine in 2009, Father Roy claimed that in total, the Francis book sold over 1 million units, and was translated into French, Chinese, Japanese, 2 Spanish editions, Portuguese, Afrikaans, and Swahili. Both of these numbers are crazy high for comics, which I get might sound surprising since other, more popular mediums tend to perform a lot better. But from the comic sales data that does exist, these are the 3 best-selling comics of all time.
Fantastic Four number 60 in 2002 with 752,699 copies, Star Wars number 1 in 2015 with 1,073,000 copies, and X-Men number 1 in 1991 with 8,186,500 copies. So yeah, if what Father Roy is saying is correct, then by the end of its run, Francis Brother of the Universe would be the third or maybe second best-selling comic book of all time that we have data for. This was clearly a huge success for Marvel, and they wanted to follow up on it with a similar biographical comic of Pope John Paul II, but Father Roy passed on it since he was worried about the bureaucracy that would inevitably have to get involved. But in a crazy turn of events, it turns out that Marvel was able to directly pitch the book to the Pope himself. Much like the origin story of Francis Brother of the Universe, this story also starts us off in Japan of all places. Pope John Paul II frequently traveled the world, and he stopped in Japan for 3 days in 1981. Marvel's rep in Japan, Gene Pelk, got lucky for a second time because another one of his friends was also a high-standing member in the priesthood. This was Father Julian, Pelk's neighbor, who was also a priest at the Shibuya Catholic Church in Tokyo. So when the Pope finally came to town, Father Julian slipped a copy of Marvel's then recently released St. Francis comic to the Pope's entourage. They loved it, and Pelk was given the opportunity to briefly meet with the Pope. It's here that Pelk reportedly handed him a copy of Brother of the Universe, mentioning that this was the first comic about a saint to ever be published by a major comic book company. According to the stories I found online, this prompted the Pope to respond in English, so why cannot John Paul II be number 2? Shortly after this successful meeting, the Pope sent over his longtime friend and official biographer, Father Mieczysław Maliński, which I'm sure I just butchered, over to Pelk to be his representative in these matters. This provided a major source of legitimacy, as Father Maliński provided first-hand information about the Pope's life, and also brought with him several pictures of the Pope as a boy for all of the artists to use as reference. The comic, titled The Life of Pope John Paul II, was meant to be very similar to Brother of the Universe. It's detached from the Marvel Comics universe and is a down-to-earth biography of the Pope's life, free from over-the-top embellishments. The only real differences is that this comic would be bookended by scenes with a newspaper reporter seeing and recognizing the Pope's influence, and the fact that John Paul II was still alive at the time of making the book. This provided an interesting hurdle. Where's a good spot to end a biography of a person that's currently living? Well, the answer came about in a very tragic way, since mid-production, there was an attempted assassination on the Pope's life. This and his recovery were included in the book, as a triumphant ending based on a major world event that was still fresh in people's minds would just be good writing. This timeliness must have also been really great for sales, so it makes a lot of sense why they would advertise it right there on the front cover. As for units sold, Marvel once again teamed up with Polished Press for the unique publishing and distribution method that made Francis such a bestseller. But without any hard data, I scoured the internet and libraries to see how well it sold. I've seen claims of 500,000, a million, and even millions plural units sold. But regardless, even the low end is insane when compared to modern comic sales, and the fact that it was also translated into several languages, much like Francis Brother of the Universe, certainly didn't hurt either. After not being involved with the Pope comic, Father Roy approached Marvel about a biography about Mother Teresa, but this got significantly less attention. It sold the least out of the 3 books and wasn't translated into other languages. However, what it lacked in sales, the comic made up for in critical acclaim, with Mother Teresa herself being a fan, and the book also won the Catholic Press Association's Best Children's Book of the Year award in 1984. Fun fact about that last one, the folks over at Marvel didn't know that they won the award, or even that they were nominated in the first place, since in order to qualify, the book needed to be published by a Catholic company. Due to the dual copyright between Marvel and the Franciscan Communications Office of New York, Father Roy handled everything and was the one that accepted the award. I guess he just didn't communicate all that well to Marvel. There were a couple more projects between the two companies in the works, one for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the other was to be a 4-issue miniseries recounting the history of the Catholic Church in America. However, corporate restructuring over at Marvel caused these projects to be dropped.
These days, it really does seem like the Marvel Catholic comics are being forgotten to time, and maybe it's because of the dual copyright, but none of these issues have been released digitally. And while yes, there are scans online, the quality isn't anything to write home about. For what they are though, these books are actually really good. However, the absurdity begins and ends with the fact that it's just Marvel publishing these. There's no over-the-top superhero flourishes and no super funny panels that get shared around online. It's just an interesting backstory that really nobody's talking about. And it's not like it's freaking Battle Pope or anything, but if you want me to talk about that one, I am definitely willing to make a dedicated video sometime in the future. But if you like this video, then why not consider subscribing or even watching another one? And if you liked this, then maybe check out the rest of the show. It's called Because Comics, and I take a look at all the crazy, strange, and straight up bizarre things that make comic books, well, comic books. I have a dedicated playlist with every episode of the show, so maybe give that a watch if you're interested. But anyway, I hope you learned at least a little something new, and hopefully, I'll see you next time.